Given, and it's also
Today, it's never been
putting the squeeze. They make money on
excessive materialism and militarism. We know full well that racism is still that hound of hell.
So tell me a little bit about Chinese school. How is that different other than being culturally specific?
Yeah, so I went to Chinese school up until like senior year of high school, and then I took Chinese classes in college too.
Okay.
But basically, you learn to read and write Chinese. You hang out with other Chinese American kids.
Okay.
And that's basically it. I mean, it sucked. I hated it while I was there because I was like, I just want to sleep in because I'm not a morning person. But yeah, every Saturday I was forced to wake up at 7 a.m. and go to Chinese school and do the whole thing. A few of my white friends would come with me sometimes because they were so fascinated by it. They're like, what is Chinese school?
It sounds fascinating.
So they would like come and sit with me as Chinese school happened.
How big are those classes? Is it like a Sunday school situation?
It's almost like Sunday school, but Chinese. I think it was like 10 or 12 people. This is where we talked about that boy I had a crush on. He was in my school and then he cheated off of me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I was like,
That's
I
so
studied
funny.
so hard for this fucking test. You're not gonna copy off of me. Yeah.
So do you learn like general education at Chinese school? Is it is it additive or is it
No,
cultural?
you just learn Chinese.
Oh,
You
gotcha.
learn to
The
read
language.
and write. You learn like
You learn Mandarin and Cantonese?
just Mandarin.
Just Mandarin?
At least at my Chinese school, it's just Mandarin. And you learn like, because Chinese people kind of speak in proverbs. So
Okay.
you learn a lot of those proverbs. Yeah, and you just learn to read and write, and you just take tests all the time. And
Wow.
that's basically it.
Well,
Yeah.
first of all,
Yes.
on that topic, Sandie Chang, it was such a pleasure to have you here.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are the host of another great podcast, which I've had the pleasure of being on before,
Yes.
Now in Color.
Yeah. For listeners who don't know, Now in Color is a history podcast for those who have been erased from history, and we bring them back to the forefront. And then we talk about other things too, like intergenerational trauma, which is a huge topic.
Right.
Yeah.
And now we're doing a bit of a podcast collab.
Yes.
Which is really cool.
Yeah. So tell me a bit about your podcast for my listeners.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So my podcast is called First Generation Burden, and it's a podcast about conversations with immigrants and the children of immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something that I started a few years ago, right after Trump was elected, actually, in order to just have some sort of response, at least from a personal level, of what felt like negative immigrant-based rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to talk to a lot of my friends and people I know and people that I was kind of fascinated by within my circle in order to just communicate their stories as well as understand more about people that are living their dream and their truth in this country when the country is essentially not loving them back and giving them the truth that they probably deserve. So that's kind of where that started, and then it just turned into a bit of a content bear that I'm constantly thinking about and dealing with.
Same. We actually talked about this right when I walked in. I was just like, I think
Yes.
I'm getting burnt out by my own podcast that I love it dearly, but like the editing process and just like thinking about it all the time and being like,
The brutality of the editing process.
was this like enough history? Was the storytelling okay?
Sure.
Like, and did someone say something that they shouldn't have said? And I have to like check in with them, and it's like a whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. The self-editing too, during the course of it.
Self-editing. Yeah, I did a lot of that too in the beginning. And now I'm just like, I don't care, whatever.
Well, that's good. It's not kind of good to just not care, because then you'll start being a self-watchdog in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then you won't, on the back end, it's just way less work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What day do you drop your podcast?
Mondays.
Mondays.
But I didn't do one last week, and I feel really guilty about it. And now I'm
Guilt is
like,
good.
I have to do it. I've been thinking about it all last week. I was just like, maybe I should have, because maybe my listeners are disappointed. But like, no one has reached out to me, and I don't think anyone really cares.
I think it's a comfort thing.
Yeah.
People just like regularity. They like schedule.
Yes, they do.
And I know that we were talking earlier before we turned the mics on. I was talking about how I did 6 episodes per week, tried to do 6 and 6 and 6. And then now I'm a little bit off schedule in order to just be able to maintain my life. And, for me, the seasonal schedule is more of like an exercise. Mm-hmm. So now I'm trying something else and just trying to be a little bit more loose format. I don't know if people are responding to that or people are digging it, but that's just my personal vibe right now.
I also have to remind listeners I'm not getting paid for it. So
Yeah, totally.
I have a life outside of this beautiful podcast. I wish I were getting paid for it. I would do this forever. Yeah.
Well, before we jump into your format.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. There's going to be 2 formats today.
2 competing formats.
Yeah.
To get some preliminaries out of the way, I'd just love to hear a little bit about where you came from and your origins, and then we can jump into our topic of the day.
Okay. Wow. So I am from Riverside, California. I was born in Monterey Park, California. What else did I do with my life? I don't even know. I feel like, so my parents are Taiwanese, but they also say they're Chinese. And that's been really confusing for me, especially in the last 2 years, I feel like, because, with doing this history podcast and learning a lot about history and learning a lot about intergenerational trauma and colonialism, I also have to grapple with the fact that, China was also a colonial power at some point to Taiwan. So that's been like a very confusing thing of am I Taiwanese American or Chinese American? But because all my life growing up, I've been like, oh, I'm Chinese American. But I do feel culturally more connected to Taiwan.
Sure.
But when I tell that to my parents, they're like, no, we're Chinese. So it's very, very confusing, even though they were born and raised in Taiwan. But they still believe that Taiwan is the real China. What
does that mean? Taiwan is the real China?
Because when Chiang Kai-shek, sorry, this is getting into history already, but when Chiang Kai-shek went to Taiwan to escape the communists, basically he also overtook Taiwan and killed thousands upon thousands of people, and became a dictator in his own right.
Sure.
But growing up, a lot of nationalist Chinese people were thinking oh, he was the best president. He was basically Obama to us. But then I read this book about how he tortured and killed all these indigenous Taiwanese people, and basically was this is the new China now, because he also took a lot of architecture and art from the real China, quote unquote. So that's where my parents are coming from. So yeah, it's just been really confusing in the past 2 years of am I Taiwanese American or Chinese American? Or maybe I'm just both. Who knows?
Sure.
Yeah. But
Your parents wrestle with those issues as well, or is this primarily you?
It's just primarily me. And when I talk to my parents about it, they're just no, you're Chinese. But to me, I feel like I'm more Taiwanese, and they're more Taiwanese than Chinese.
How long have your parents been in the States for?
35 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I've always lived in Riverside, California. And then after that, I went to school in New York, in upstate New York. And then I just stayed here. And then that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know much about my life. My life's pretty boring.
Doesn't sound that boring to me.
Yeah.
But you're acting now.
Yeah, now I'm acting. I went to an acting school. I just finished in June. Had a bit of a depression session. I was like, what's happening?
Sure.
Art is really hard.
I know we
Made
talked a little bit about
podcast.
this on your podcast.
Yeah, and then I created a podcast out of that depression session. And then I had my very first paid acting gig yesterday. I woke up in the morning, and then my friend was like, my actor dropped out, so come and act. So I got the script literally an hour before shooting, did my thing, and I was like, oh, that was actually really fun. I actually really enjoy acting, and it reminded me of why I even went to acting school to begin with. I played a therapist, which is my brand. I am a therapist. And that was pretty much it. I'm also producing a pilot right now, so that's another thing that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's the bigger lift, I think.
Yes. And yeah, I just feel like I'm obsessed with creating content, but then I get burnt out by my own content. So
Sure.
I just need to remember to ask for support. I had like a production meeting yesterday and not be afraid to ask for support. And I think that's something that I'm learning in the year is just like, it's okay to collaborate with people.
Yes.
You don't have to like do things by yourself. You don't have to be a perfectionist about everything and control everything. So yeah, that's my life now.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest lesson that you've learned since you've left? Is it the collaborative element, or is like you talk about perfection? I find that surrounding yourself with people who are also better than you
Yes.
is possibly the best way to go.
Yeah.
And then keeping the trust circle very, very tight.
Yeah, that and just like letting go of people who are very negative and cynical.
Yeah.
Because I find, I don't know if this is true for you, but I find in New York or in just the creative space in general, it's really easy to, find people who are just like, oh, like I'm never going to make it. And like, this isn't working out for me. And like, maybe I'm just like not meant to be an artist or be a creative. And it's really easy to fall into that misery loves company sort of attitude. And I feel like even after school, in June, I was like in that space of like, oh, maybe this just isn't right for me.
Yeah.
So it's easy to find people like that too, especially in a place like New York. So I find that hanging out with people not only who are better than me, but also who are always hopeful and optimistic is really, really important to collaborate.
I agree with that.
And also that really helps with letting go of perfection, because people who tend to fall into this cynical space tend to be perfectionists. And they're like, oh, it didn't meet some perfect standard that they put in their heads.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It feels like lack of imperfection or lack of perfection, essentially imperfection, is really just character.
Yeah.
And individualism.
Yeah.
That's where I've landed with that.
Yeah.
Kind of me wrestling with what I always felt was the need to be better in general.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think it's like a huge immigrant thing as well, because we're always taught that we have to be, what is that? Work twice as hard to get half of what the white people get.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We are the other.
Yeah.
From the other mentality.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think perfectionism served me for a long time until it stopped serving me. And now I'm like learning to let that go and being okay with not being seen as perfect, or, just being seen as like a human, because all humans are flawed and like I'm not perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today?
What? Oh, so today,
or is that your line?
who are we bringing into the room today?
Yeah, there you go.
Yes. This is my first time, like, because I'm usually making someone else do the research. So now it's my turn. I'm going to take a sip of water.
Tables are turned.
Yeah. So the pressure is on. Now I know why people are so nervous, because I'm like, oh, did I do enough research? I think I did.
Well, I did bring in Wikipedia printouts into mine.
Yeah, I printed out some things that I've written down. So today we're going to be talking in honor of Veterans Day.
Yes,
which is today.
it is Veterans Day.
We're going to be talking about the Civil War and the Chinese American Civil War soldiers who fought in the American Civil War. So that's my topic today. And specifically, I'm going to be focusing on a soldier named Joseph Pierce. So are you ready? Yeah. So for those who don't know about the Civil War, we're going to have some background. So the Civil War was fought between 1861 to 1865. And the narrative is that it was largely over slavery, which I think is true. So the Union had outlawed slavery and told the Southerners, like, all right, it's time to give up slavery. Like, stop. But the South was like, no, I don't want to. This is our property. And if you don't agree, we're going to secede and form our own country. And slaves are going to be legal forever in our new country. And the Union was like, fuck that. That's not going to happen. – Long story short, war breaks out. So a lot of people now in the South still believe, and these are people who like wear the Confederate flag as a shirt or like have that hanging around. So they still argue to this day that, oh, it's not about slavery. It was about like taxes and property. But then again, your property at that time were human beings. They were slaves. So it was about all of that. And to be fair, I also want to point out that Lincoln himself wasn't morally opposed to slavery either, and also did not think that at the time black lives were equal to white lives. And what we know about the emancipation...
He was a Republican.
He was a Republican, so we have to remember that.
A different type of Republican.
Yes. He was a different type.
Definition at the time.
And like I feel like we put him on this pedestal, but at the time he has said things that like he doesn't believe in the freedom of slaves. And the war only broke out really because he wanted to keep the Union, and it was like politically convenient for him to then release the Emancipation Proclamation. So we shouldn't hold him up to that pedestal, just as a background, but that's not what we're talking about today. So there's a war. War is happening.
Yes. There's a civil war.
There's
a pretty big situation happening.
That's happening.
Not everyone's super stoked on it.
Yeah. The North and the South are fighting. And then the Emancipation Proclamation comes out, where black soldiers are recruited to fight in the Union for the promise of full citizenship. And that's another thing that we have to remember is during a war, you should never listen to what the government tells you because it's going to be a lie for their convenience. So what we know in our history classes is, so black soldiers were fighting. About 170,000 black soldiers were fighting along with white soldiers. But what we don't know is that Chinese American soldiers were also fighting in the Civil War, which I didn't know.
Yeah, this is fascinating. When you told me this is the topic, I was like, whoa, let's talk about it.
And how I found out about it was actually through Instagram, and I thought it was like one of those like Photoshop things. I was just like, there's no way that there's this Chinese guy fighting in the Civil War. But then I researched it, and I was like, there are actually Chinese people fighting in the Civil War. Because like what we know about Chinese people is that they came over for the gold rush, and that was basically it. And then like from 1848 to 1855, Chinese Americans were ostracized, lynched, and pretty much treated badly. We worked on railroads as slaves almost. And that's kind of the narrative that we see depicted in movies, depicted in our history classes. So my question is, why would Chinese Americans even fight in the Civil War?
Right. Why would they? What's their connection?
Yeah, exactly.
Or their investment?
Yeah. So that was like my main question going into this, because there were only 200 Chinese Americans living in but in the States at the time. But 58 of those 200 served in the Civil War. And 5 of them fought for the Confederacy.
Oh, wow.
This is how little Chinese Americans there were that we know the exact numbers. 2 of them were Christopher and Stephen Bunker, which are the Bunker twins that I talk about a lot in my podcast. The conjoined twins. I don't want to call them Siamese twins, but the conjoined twins.
Sure.
And that's why they're called Siamese twins, because they're from the country of Siam. And the reason they fought in the Civil War was because their family owned slaves.
They could be called Siamese twins.
Yes, because technically they were from
So it's
Siam.
less problematic to call the Bunker twins Siamese twins.
Yes.
But any other set of conjoined twins, do not call them Siamese twins.
Do not call them Siamese twins because they're not from Siam. So I'm going to focus on Joseph Pierce, who was the original Instagram picture that caught my eye. I even sent this photo to my dad, and he was just like, this is Photoshop. Chinese people did not exist in America at the time. And I was like, right, they didn't. But he did, and he actually rose to the ranks in the Civil War. So what do we know about Joseph Pierce? Which was not his real name, but that was his chosen name when he was brought to the United States from Canton, China, when he was 10 years old, by his adopted father named Amos Peck. And Peck was this Far East trader, and Captain from Connecticut. And you're probably wondering why like some white dude is adopting Chinese people before it was trendy. But this little dude, poor little Joseph, was sold to Peck by his biological father. So his real dad was like, I don't want you anymore. And
Brutal.
sold it to this white guy, Amos Peck. So technically he was his slave at first. But the records seem to show that Amos Peck was actually really, really nice to him, really chill. And he was probably an abolitionist because he was from the North. He was from Connecticut.
Right.
And he actually decided to adopt him and raise him with his own kids, with his biological kids,
Good,
which is
good-ish
like so
dude.
great. Yeah. Because historical records show that Joseph Pierce could read and write. So that means he went to school. He wasn't just like hanging around the house and being a little house slave.
Sure.
And he was like accepted as a member of the Peck family.
He wasn't like his little short round
No.
his little adventure partner.
Yeah.
That was the lesser than.
Yeah, so he was actually just like part of the family, which is like really nice.
That is
actually. Nice. But despite all this, and he like grew up American, it seems like he lived in Connecticut. He was still described as yellow and a Chinaman, so he was always made to feel like an outsider and not really accepted as an American,
Sure.
which is something I feel like me as an immigrant, I've definitely experienced. I don't know how you have felt growing up as an immigrant.
I've definitely felt the otherness. Well, as a little bit of a sidebar, I remember, I'm from New Jersey. I've talked about it on this podcast before, but growing up in New Jersey, in my neighborhood, in my suburb, essentially, I didn't really have Asian friends. I didn't really have another Asian friend until I was in high school, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, I went to an elementary school that was primarily African American. Mm-hmm. So it was only me and my sister, and there were no white kids in that school. I remember there was one classmate, Laura, in second grade who was white. Mm-hmm. And then there were a couple of multiracial students. But other than that, it was, I definitely stood out in the class pictures. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Same way. I mean, Riverside now is pretty representative, I think. It's like now like the cool place to live.
Gotcha.
Because like I think the art scene is really blowing up there. But growing up at the time, it was largely, I mean, I went to a Christian school from my elementary school, and it was like all white, basically. And yeah, there weren't a lot of Asians growing up either. I don't think I had Asian friends also until high school, which is really weird to think about.
It is weird to think about.
Yeah, and I feel like even now I don't have a lot of Asian friends. Like I try, and then I feel like I try to have Asian friends, but yeah, I just feel like a lot of my friends tend to be not Asian. Like I'm thinking about it, and that's like
that's the well, you know, at what point are you trying to make an overt effort to you know, have your friends be of a certain representation, you know?
Yeah.
At some point your friends are just your friends.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I feel like that was a problem there because like the stereotype
Sure.
is that Asians only hang out with other Asians.
Sure.
And like I kind of resented that at first. So like I don't know if like a part of me like subconsciously just didn't have Asian friends because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope not, but I don't know.
In high school, I hung out with a lot of Asian friends. I had a lot. All of a sudden, I went from having none to having a ton.
Yeah.
You know, and then I remember thinking I was being almost oversensitive to my Asianness at the time, where I just leaned in super hard,
Yeah.
and then I leaned away again,
Yeah.
and then I'm edging towards. I'm in the middle now, where you know I have a good diverse group of individuals that I hold close. But now I'm again embracing my background and holding it as a something of strength. You know.
Yeah. Same. That's why I'm like.
Because before it
I
felt a
want more
crutch,
Asian
but now
friends.
I feel like I feel empowered by it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like I think what frustrated me was I felt like. Did you hear about the Harvard case?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I have it in my notes here to talk about.
Oh, okay. We can talk about it later.
We
if you
can.
want. Yeah, maybe. Okay, well,
Well, after Joseph Pierce?
we'll circle back to this topic. Sorry, got off track.
No
So
worries.
anyway, we all felt like we were yellow and a Chinaman, just like Joseph Pierce.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes. So
Well, I got to say also that of this era of having found information based on this individual that otherwise would have been lost.
Yeah.
Who was his biographer? How did they?
Oh,
where did all the data come from?
So a lot of this research came from a man named Irving Moy, and he calls himself an amateur historian. And he's the one that identified Joseph Pierce's story because of his own Chinese American heritage and also his own experience in the military, I believe. And thank you so much, Irving Moy, for uncovering a lot of this information, because I don't even think it was like on Wikipedia at all, unless I'm mistaken. So a lot of this information would have been lost, but I think Moy actually like went through the documents himself. Like I found this on like one of those old GeoCities websites, but it was like really well documented, and he had like pictures of like not like birth certificates and like wedding certificates and things like that. Mm-hmm. So, and he even said that he like took a pilgrimage to Joseph Pierce's gravesite. Wow, which is great. Spoiler alert, Joseph Pierce is no longer with us.
Oh,
but
damn.
Not because
he's not a vampire?
He's not a vampire.
He's not an immortal being? Damn.
Yeah.
Come on, Joseph, step up your game at least.
I know. So this quote-unquote Chinaman enlisted in the war, and we're not sure why, but we can sort of assume he just wanted to prove that he was American, which happens, this isn't far-fetched because we see this in World War II.
Right.
With Japanese Americans.
Right.
Because despite being shipped off to like internment camps and seen by the entire country as the enemy, a lot of Japanese Americans enlisted in the military to prove their loyalty to the United States.
Sometimes you just got to prove a point.
Yeah, exactly. But I wrote down, history has shown time and time again that the United States has zero chill, and we are all in a psycho-abusive relationship with the U.S., myself included.
That's so true.
Yeah, so we're in this abusive relationship with the U.S., and looks like Joseph Pierce is too.
There was a bit of a toxic codependency situation happening.
Yeah.
Between America and also its immigrants.
Yeah, because we all want to be a part of America, but America's just like, no. They love us and hate us.
But also America needs us.
Yeah.
And America was once us.
I know. What the fuck, America? Come on. Just let us live.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So war breaks out, and Joseph Pierce is like, I want to prove my love for America. He's a farmer at the time. He's 21, and he enlists on July 26, 1862.
Do you know how old he was?
He was 21 years old. Yeah. And he becomes a part of the 14th Regiment Company F of the Connecticut Volunteer Infantry that became part of the 2nd Brigade of the 3rd Division 2nd Army Corps of the Army of the Potomac. So just after a year later, he's enlisted on November 1st, 1863. He smashed that bamboo ceiling and was promoted to corporal.
Is that a phrase that's on there?
That's what I wrote down. So to be clear, I also put a lot of editorial comments in my notes. Got it.
He smashed the bamboo ceiling.
Yes, so go Joseph Pierce. And I even wrote down, for perspective, I, at the age of 21, was drinking fish bowls and taking shots and partying all night and trying to emulate the Jersey Shore and not at all ready to graduate college with my liberal arts degree.
The Jersey Shore.
That was me. Yeah, actually, when you called me to tell me to do this, I was just like, is the Jersey Shore still doing okay?
No, Jersey Shore is doing great.
Yeah, it's such a good show. I love it.
It's doing great.
Yeah. There's so much stuff going on with that. Sorry, I can talk about that forever, but we're not going to talk about that. Going back to Joseph Pierce, who smashes...
I know you can talk about that forever.
So Joseph Pierce, he smashes the bamboo ceiling. He's, a quote-unquote Chinaman, and he enlists in the army as a volunteer, and a year later, he's promoted to corporal, which is a pretty high rank.
Big deal.
Yeah, so it's a big deal. So why didn't we know about this guy? And I'm sure he put up with a lot of racist bullshit. But he fought in Antietam, Gettysburg, and he fought all the way up to General Robert E. Lee's surrender. So he fought, he survived that entire war.
Yeah, he was in it to win it.
Yeah. So what's amazing about this?
Do you know if he was hurt? Sorry. Was he ever injured in any way?
I don't think so. Because I feel
anecdotes?
like if you got a cut back then, you're automatically dead. Because I don't think so. I think he was just like,
sure.
you know.
You got a paper cut. It was like, oh, man.
Yes, it's
Put
just
the guy
like
in the triage.
you're not sure if you're going to live. So I think he seemed pretty unscathed because, so Robert E. Lee surrenders and he's alive. But, this is what I wrote down. What was amazing this entire time he's fighting and he's like corporal. He's still rocking the Chinese braid. Like he has the whole braid thing like a badass.
Yeah.
And he's like not trying to Americanize himself. He's just like, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
Chinese.
he's not trying.
Yeah. And so of the original 1,040 men who listed in his original regiment, he was one of the 215 to survive.
Oh, that's amazing.
So that's to give it a little bit perspective.
Him and his horse braid.
Yeah, exactly. So just imagine this like, corporal fighting with that Chinese braid.
That's dope.
Yeah.
Just like whipping in the wind.
Yeah.
He's on the battlefield. He has his musket or whatever they call them.
Yeah. Like that's amazing. And like what's amazing is he fought for the Union. So he like obviously
He was on the right side.
He was on the right side. I would love to see a movie about this guy. Like that would be so badass.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And then how long did he live for afterwards?
So yeah, after the war, he went back home to Connecticut where he met and fell in love with a white woman named Martha Morgan around 1876. Mm-hmm. And see, this is how far Irving Moy did this research. He wrote down Joseph and Martha were not married in either of their hometowns, but in Branford by Reverend E.J. Eldridge of M.E. Church, who perhaps as sympathetic to the couple's plight. So
the plight of being a multiracial couple?
Yeah, so I think that's what he was trying to imply, was just like because he was a Chinese man and she was a white woman, they probably could not have gotten married.
Sure.
But this like Reverend was like, you know what, I'll marry you guys in
He's
another
like, whatever,
hometown.
bro.
Yeah, so afterwards, he just lives a normal life with Martha. He becomes an engraver in Connecticut and has 3 children.
Amazing.
Named Lulu Edna Pierce, Franklin Norris Pierce, and Howard Benjamin Pierce.
Howard Benjamin Pierce.
Yeah. And he died on January 3rd, 1916 at the age of 73.
Damn, long life.
Yeah. And he's also survived by descendants today. So these descendants actually reached out to Irving Moy, thanking him for doing all this research because they had no idea that their great-great-grandfather was this like amazing Chinese American corporal. Because I'm sure like with a lot of the generations mixing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, who knows what record keeping was back then?
Yeah. So like, I write later in my notes that Joseph Pierce starts identifying as Japanese instead of Chinese.
Oh, and what's the reason for that?
I'm assuming it's because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, and he was just like, "Oh, I don't want to be a part of."
Yeah, I'm not
whatever.
that whole situation.
Yeah, exactly.
And
so,
what's the origin of the Chinese Exclusion Act? Can you speak a bit about that?
I feel like I should know this, but I feel like I don't know enough history. I just know it happened, then it stopped happening when World War II broke out, and then now Japanese Americans were ostracized.
Gotcha. They're like, oh, one's out, one's in.
Yeah, exactly. And I just feel like a lot of it is history repeating itself because right now we're talking about, I mean, I feel like it used to be Muslims, but now it's Mexicans again. And it's just like a whole cycle of like who to blame for.
Yeah, exactly.
America's
Who's the next
problem.
scapegoat? And who's the next political tool?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I get so frustrated with Asian Americans sometimes because I don't know if you want to talk about Harvard at all, but...
No, I do want to talk about Harvard. I would love to talk about Harvard.
But what I get frustrated about...
So I applied to Harvard once. They never...
You didn't get it?
They never wrote me back, and I was like, God damn it. I knew I shouldn't have... I knew I should have studied for my algebra.
I don't know. Like, I just feel like a lot of Asian Americans, majority, don't remember that we were also once the scapegoats.
Yes.
And it's very possible that we can be the scapegoats again.
Absolutely.
Which is why we should always stand in solidarity with whoever is the scapegoat of the day. And I just feel like, you know, a lot of it is looking out for ourselves and our community instead of taking that risk and standing in solidarity. So I think that's where a lot of my frustration comes from.
Yeah, I know. I totally, and I'm sure that like starting your podcast was a big part of that.
Yeah, exactly. Because I wanted not only white Americans to see that we've always been a part of this country and we've built this country, but I also want people of color to also see that, like, you know, we need to stand together because, you know, it looks like from the past that we have stood together, but something broke us apart in between all of that.
Sure.
Yeah.
For me, it feels like a lot of people, a lot of groups we're constantly in contention for getting that level up.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then that kind of creates overt tension on top of whatever ruling class there is, using that vying for power, or that desire to vie for power within the groups, using that for political gain to maintain the power. Because you always think, I remember, like, you know, in the Obama years, I'm sure you thought the same way, where like, oh, we're on a rocket ship to outer space. we're all headed towards that glorious one beige race.
Yes.
You know, that one beige complexion.
Yeah.
And we're all going to just take it there. But then now we're in that space of, no, I'm this and I'm representing who I am, and my lineage goes all the way back to this, and we're, you know, finding empowerment on our individualism and our culturalism.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up because I feel like lately I'm getting frustrated with like representing my people.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that.
You feel it's a burden?
Yeah, I do feel like it's a burden now, and it's like it's not fair that all this representation becomes placed on this one person. And I think maybe my perspective shifted because of, you know, being in the entertainment industry, or like trying to be in the entertainment industry. And like sometimes I think it's unfair where, you know, an actor is like put on blast because they took on a role that's not very representative of their people.
Right.
Like the only person I can think of right now is Ken Jeong for doing The Hangover. And obviously I was also pissed off at him. I was also just like, why did you do that? But then again, I'm just like,
he's a doctor. He should know better.
Yeah. And then again, a part of me is just like, I get it. Like, you want to pursue this endeavor. You're like placed in a rock and a hard place. And it's not you, it's the writers, it's the directors who made this choice to make a caricature.
Sure.
If not you, it would have been another
Everyone's
Asian
kind
actor.
of complicit.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. Like I'm just getting frustrated with like, it's not just the actor or the person in front of the camera. It's also people behind the camera. And I think we need to start holding people behind the camera more accountable than the people in front.
So how do you feel about someone like Awkwafina as opposed to someone like Ken Jeong? Yeah. Where there's the Ken Jeong type where he's playing up a stereotype, where he's playing up, you know, some of the less flattering less flattering depictions of Asian people. Yeah. But then Awkwafina, who is kind of playing herself in a lot of what she does, but then there's a lot of you know, rhetoric thrown at her. Yeah. I do have a point of view on her, but I'm curious.
That is something that's interesting because that's been brought up a lot on my podcast too, of like, you know, was she putting on a black scent, quote unquote, or was she just being herself from Queens? She sounds like a girl from Queens. Yeah.
That's my point of view. Yeah. She sounds like a girl from Queens. She sounds like a lot of friends that I know, regardless of what their race is. Yeah. And I think that there's a bit of an unfairness about what she's meant to represent when she's essentially just being very true to who she is. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where... She's from New York. She listens to hip hop. She was a rapper. Scene. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it's fair that we're putting her on blast because that's who she is. Yes. But then, like, there was an episode where we talk about this specific thing about Awkwafina, where if you ever find yourself feeling defensive, you should always just stop and listen to what the other community is saying. So it is the black community that is saying that she is, you know, doing this black scent, quote unquote. I don't even know if that's like the right term for it. And like maybe where my personal defensiveness, it's like coming from a place of ignorance too. So it's just like,
I don't know. Like, I feel very torn about it.
Sure.
But I still feel like I think she's just being her. And, like, I think we view her as putting on whatever is because, like, Asian Americans haven't been seen ever.
Yeah.
Like, that side of Asian America hasn't been seen because when we are seen, we're like these fucking nerds who get into Harvard.
Yeah, totally. I didn't really apply to Harvard. That was a joke earlier.
Yeah, but that's like what frustrates me about the Harvard case too, is just like, really, this is the one thing that the Asian community is going to talk about. Like, there's a slew of...
That's such a good point.
Like, there's a slew of other
That's where we're
problems.
putting our stance in. That's where we're investing our digital ink on.
Yeah, exactly. There's like all these other problems happening. We're being marginalized. We have the highest growing poverty rate in New York City. But we're going to talk about, we can't get into Harvard because all these black and brown people are getting into Harvard in our place. And I'm like, really?
That's so interesting.
That is so, well, first, it's racist. Second, it's just like, come on. Like, we can do better than that. Like, we can talk about more important issues. And why do you want to go to Harvard? It's like filled with like crazy people. Like, crazy people come out of Harvard. Like, didn't Bill O'Reilly go there?
Oh, I don't know that. I can't speak on that. That's so... That'd be an interesting tidbit if that is true.
Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like when I think about Harvard, it's like these like really rich white dudes who come out to be conservative Republicans who don't really stand up for human rights.
I think a lot of Asians end up being conservative in later life, or at least a lot of like Asians from home.
Oh, like...
Yeah, from
like
Asia,
motherland.
from motherland. Yeah, I know the a lot of my relatives have skewed conservative over the years, but I'm wondering also if that's just a mindset that of being older in this country, and that's like fiscally driven, or if that's something that's just an ideological thing, like truly ideological. And then I know that our nation gets criticized for nationalism, but if that's essentially just self-protection, the mindset of self-protection, whether it manifests itself in fear rhetoric, or like closing your borders or whatever, does that protectionism just filter out into old age? I'm just thinking about old age. I'm thinking about getting older. My birthday was a couple weeks ago, so.
Oh, happy birthday!
Oh, thanks. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm at an age now where my every year is just 1 year closer to death.
Yes. I mean, I don't know. I feel like. I mean, I can only speak for the Asian community. I do feel like the Asian American community has sort of bought into the model minority myth.
Yes.
And believe that if we try our best to be white, then maybe we will be protected somehow. But I don't think that's the case. And I'm just, that's like a huge thing and the Harvard thing just made it more disappointing. I was just like, come on, guys. Like, I know we're better than this.
Right.
Like, I know that we could achieve so much if we could just stand in solidarity with everyone else against white supremacy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, do you ever read Next Shark?
Oh my fucking God. I hate Next Shark.
Next Shark is...
I hate it.
It just populates my Instagram feed. Well, let me say, I do agree that the model minority model is shit.
It's a trap.
It's a trap. It's completely a trap. But then Next Shark, and I don't really look at the site, so I can't really speak to the editorial of Next Shark, but I will say when their headlines do populate my Instagram feed, I'm always just like, ugh. I'm like, ugh. Like, this is what we're talking about?
Oh my God, Next Shark is...
Although it is dope that there are, because of the midterm elections, that there are some really interesting Asian politicians that are currently in the
Yes.
Yes.
So there's that.
I'm
really excited that we have the house, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
So...
And Next Shark does speak to Asian exceptionalism, which I like. But that's part of the whole Harvard thing.
Yeah.
But then that's like sitting Asians on a certain class and not allowing for diversity within your own group.
Yeah. Next Shark also is like weirdly... were you ever into Harry Potter? I'm going to make a Harry Potter reference.
No, I've never seen a Harry Potter movie or read a Harry Potter book, so I'm exposing myself right now.
Oh, okay. Well, for listeners who do know Harry Potter, then Next Shark is like...
I've heard of Harry Potter, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm aware that there is...
Well, there's like the pure bloods. I feel like Next Shark is like all about pure bloods, And anyone who has any interracial relation, they're mudbloods.
Yeah.
Which are like the worst thing you could call anyone in the wizarding world, which is the mudbloods. Sorry, this is my nerd coming out. But Next Shark frequently posts headlines about white men torturing, raping, and killing Asian women. And that is like, I think, a roundabout way of saying, oh, this is why Asian women should not be with anyone else besides Asian men.
Oh.
And it's like...
You think it's a tactic?
I definitely think it's a tactic because that is what a lot of these forums... I don't know if you've heard of Celeste Ng, the author Celeste Ng. She was recently attacked because, you know, her book is turning into a movie, and like Reese Witherspoon bought it, and so she got more of a platform.
Sure.
So of course the Asian American community saw her, and there's like this incel community within the Asian American community of like men who don't believe Asian women should be with white dudes. And she's married to a white guy, has kids, and like she just gets like all these like hate mail about her kids being like they're gonna turn into Elliot Rodgers is the person they always say. That's why you shouldn't have mixed race kids because they'll turn into Elliot Rodgers.
And who's Elliot Rodgers?
He's the guy who shot up UC Santa Barbara.
Got it.
And he was mixed race. And that's, first of all, really unfair to
horrible.
Mixed race children and people
That's
who
terrible.
are mixed race. And it's just like...
Next Shark says that?
No, Next Shark doesn't say that, but...
Okay, we're not making that claim.
Yeah.
Next Shark has never said that.
Next Shark has never said that, but a lot of these people...
But on forums.
Take
on like a Reddit
Next Shark,
forum
yeah,
type of
on
world.
Reddit or on Twitter. They take Next Shark articles that have like these torture, rape things happening, and they make that as their talking point. They're just like, this is why.
Ugh.
Like, for example, here are like 15 links to these like torture, rape things that have happened to Asian women. And it's just like disgusting.
Yeah, that's terrible.
And I wish Next Shark would say something about it if they really don't believe that.
If they, if they make a statement about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, as a media platform, I suppose that they have a point of view. Mm-hmm. I just wish it spoke more to a point of view that I could relate to. But then again, I'm not always on the site, so.
Yeah, it's just very militant, and I don't know. It's kind of, when I see Next Shark headlines on Facebook, I'm just like, I just feel like it's like a crazy person talking. Like it feels like.
It's clickbait.
Yeah, it's very
clickbaity.
clickbaity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ugh, I hate Next Shark. I'm like angry thinking about it.
Sorry for bringing it up.
No,
wow.
no,
This is such
it's
a
fine.
touchy topic.
Yeah.
But the whole Harvard thing.
Yes.
Go back to that. I feel that that discussion, it's a bit of a pushback too against the idea that Asians will be the largest rising immigrant population in the States. Like they're saying like 2055 or something along those lines.
Oh, is that I didn't know that statistic.
Yeah. So, and I hope that I'm clarifying that statistic correctly, but it does feel that there was some sort of built-in stopgap of that. It's like, oh, they're kind of getting a lot. So,
yeah, I don't know. So what I originally saw it as was the Harvard admissions process does have a lot of problems attached to it. I think originally what Harvard said was like, oh, Asians don't have a lot of personality or something like that.
ooh,
So that was fucked up. Like,
Yeah.
I agree with that. That's fucked up. Don't say that. But what I don't agree with is this lawsuit
yes,
to basically dismantle affirmative action, because affirmative action not only helps marginalized groups such as Black and Brown Americans from disenfranchised areas, disenfranchised areas, but also it helps Asian Americans too.
it does. Yeah.
And I just feel like, first of all, it's this white dude that's leading the lawsuit. It's like this conservative white dude. So like, why are we following him?
Right.
He's not out for our best interests. He's out for dismantling affirmative action, which would then not benefit anyone except white people.
Sure.
At the end of the day. And I'm just like, of all the things you're going to stand up for, it's this. It's embarrassing. I think it's embarrassing.
It is embarrassing.
Yeah.
I'm wondering. Well, I do wonder where it's all going to shake out. But in terms of having this idea of the affirmative action conversation and lumping it in with the Asian American conversation because those two things are typically never really brought up or contextualized together.
Yeah.
That is in and of itself is fascinating without putting commentary on it.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I've met a lot of Asian Americans who really believe that they didn't get into an Ivy League because of affirmative action. Like, they really believe that, like, a black student took their place. And because of that,
a terrible thing to think.
It's terrible. And they're just like, I would have had like a better life if I went to Harvard or Princeton or whatever. And I'm like, dude, you're a hedge fund manager.
Like,
calm
what are you
down.
talking
Like, you're
about?
fine.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to be fine. Like, and that's something I feel like we don't really
I went
recognize.
to Rutgers. I think I'm doing okay. I'm happy with my life.
You're doing great.
No,
Yeah.
I'm doing all right.
Yeah. And it's just like, I don't think we talk about that we also have privilege.
Yeah.
And like, we need to also be like, yeah, we do have privilege as
How
well.
do you feel? Okay, this is really interesting. I want to dig in here.
Yes.
How do you feel about the idea of Asian privilege? Because I think it's real, and I think that it also goes into the whole like idea of Asians kind of sticking to their own group and being very insular, you know, and then having that insularity be a source of privilege.
Yeah.
And I think because you know back in Asia there is very much a unofficial ranking type of vibe happening over there.
Yeah.
You know, I think Ali Wong talks about, you know, fancy Asians and jungle
Yes.
Asians. I am one of those two. You know, I'll let the listener determine which one I am.
Yes.
Yeah. And you're definitely the other one.
Yes, I'm the other one.
Yeah. It's interesting. And then America doesn't really understand those interpersonal or inter-Asian dynamics.
Yeah, because we're so interchangeable in the eyes of America.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
We're not. And we have our own.
Interchangeable. That's so interesting.
And like, I mean, that's probably why Harvard admissions, like, we have no personality because in their eyes, it's just like, it's all the same.
What does that mean when they say that? What does that mean?
I think it was just like, there wasn't.
Was that a flippant comment?
I don't
Was that something in a memo?
It was like probably something like how Asian Americans don't have like, I don't even know, like personality wise, as in like not, I think there was like boldness attached to it or like some sort of extracurricular activity that's exciting. I don't even know. I don't know. But that was like the headline of like, we have no personalities.
Sure.
Oh, that's not true.
Yeah, that's
and
not
I think
true.
that's why Awkwafina gets so much shit because she has a huge personality and that's great, but that's who she is.
Yes.
But then it doesn't fit into this narrative of what an Asian American should be. Yeah.
Did you hear that one insight? And I have no idea where it's coming from, or at least I don't know where the insight originated from. But the idea that a larger, heavy-set Asian person feels more American than a fitter, thinner Asian person, and that person feels more like they're from Asia. Have you heard this?
I have not heard this.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it kind of, and this is no hate towards my brother, it kind of reminded me of my brother.
Oh, got
a little bit. Like,
I've never met your brother.
Oh, huh?
I never met your brother. Okay.
Yeah. But he is like, he's always been bigger.
Sure.
Like, he's never been like a tiny, thin Asian man. I
Sure.
don't know. He's always just been bigger. And like, I don't even mean like he's obese or anything. He's just bigger.
Yeah.
Like, he's very bulky, very strong. And I think people did view him a lot as he joined the Marines afterwards. So.
Oh, did he now?
Yeah. So I was actually
he's American as hell.
Yeah, he's super American. And it's really interesting because I do feel like, he's probably going to listen to this. So hi. I do feel like.
What's up, Sandie's brother?
He's like way more patriotic than
interesting.
me. Not in a bad way. I even like wrote about him here, but yeah, he joined the Marines right after high school. Before September 11th. He was September 11th actually happened during his second month in boot camp. Because I think in the Marines it's a 3-month boot camp period. Yeah. And then that's when they're like, oh fuck, war is definitely happening.
Yeah.
And I feel like and correct me if I'm wrong if you're listening to this, but I feel like he went to the Marines because he was just like, well, I don't
Correct me if I'm wrong. If you're listening.
Yeah, if you're listening to this, text me. Correct me if I'm
exactly.
wrong.
Yeah. Call in. Listen, callers.
Yeah.
We'll be waiting for your phone.
I just feel like he joined because he didn't really want to go to college. He was just like, I don't want to do the typical Asian thing to go to college and like study something he didn't want to study. He was just like, I like paintball. He loved paintball. He loved like roughing it. He was like really into like Call of Duty. I don't even know if the Call of Duty was a thing back then, but he was super into like violent video games.
I'm sure he was into like Halo back in the day.
Yes, he was super into Halo. I remember we played Halo together. And
was he into Counter-Strike?
He was probably, yeah, I think he was into Counter-Strike. He was into like video games.
Counter-Strike was like the Fortnite of the late 90s.
Yeah, he was into that and like cars. Like he was super into like Fast and Furious type things.
My precious Fast and Furious, which I love.
So
and I will go to bat for any day.
He was like super into like racing cars and doing that. Yeah. So he joined the Marines thinking, he was just like, yeah, they said I'll get free college after this, but at least I get to like do this for a little bit. But then 9/11 happened and he's like, oh fuck.
He's like, wow, I'm really doing it.
Yeah. So he actually did go to Iraq.
How many tours did he do?
I think just the one. Correct me if I'm... Yeah, just the one. Yeah, because I was 12. I was really...
You keep saying, correct me if I'm wrong. I was like, I don't
know.
As if your brother's going to actually text you right now.
Yeah, because I was 12. Yeah, because September 11th happened. And then like a year later, we were in Iraq for some reason instead of, just chilling out for a little bit and attacking the right people, quote unquote.
Sure.
But yeah, he went to Iraq. He was the first platoon. What are they called? The group regiment that went to Baghdad. And it was really scary at the time because I remember at the time that was like when the war was televised. So the war was always on like TV. Like we always had our TV on.
It's on C-SPAN.
Yeah, it was day. Like constantly on.
You see all the nighttime videos of all the artillery, and yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah, and it was crazy because I remember my parents told all of our close friends not to ring the doorbell because the doorbell would signify that he was dead, basically, in combat. Because the only time they would come tell you, they would ring the doorbell and basically be like, I'm sorry for your loss, so on. So we were like constantly afraid of the doorbell. I was like terrified of the doorbell.
Yeah.
And at the time there wasn't everything there is now where you could just like Skype people.
Yeah.
So it was like we would wait for snail mail to come. And he even wrote this like,
so true. You couldn't Skype. Yeah.
Yeah. I even
FaceTime.
remember this letter he wrote, and I think it was like because, the captain, or I'm so bad with military terms, but basically whoever was in charge was like, it's time to write that letter to your family of like, if you die, what would you want to say? So I remember that he like wrote this letter to everyone in my family and was just like, if I die, here's everything I wish I told you and things like that. And I was like so traumatized by this. And I remember I didn't even tell.
Did he tell this to you, or did he show you this after the fact?
No, I got the letter. And he was just like, this is what I want to say if I'm dead.
How old were you at the time?
I was 12. I was so emotional, obviously. Yeah. I remember that we were interviewed by the Taiwanese news station, and I was just like sobbing on live TV and just like crying nonstop because the reporter asked me in Chinese. He was just like, do your teachers or do your classmates know that your brother is actually serving in Iraq right now? And I said, no. I'm probably going to get emotional now, so I'm sorry if I start crying. And I said, no, they don't know. And he was like, why? Why didn't you tell them? And I was like, because if I say it, then it's real and he may not come back, and that would be too much for me. And I was just like weeping on TV, so much so that when I went to Taiwan, people recognized me as that girl who was weeping on live television about her brother. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How long later did you go to Taiwan? And you're a kid.
Yeah, I was a kid. I think I just went that summer because I used to go every summer to like visit my grandparents.
You're the crying girl.
I was the crying girl, and they were like, "Oh my God, I recognize you as the girl who cried because of her brothers in Iraq."
You were like a meme.
I was like a meme. Thankfully, memes weren't a thing back then because it was like straight up ugly crying. And
oh, wow, damn. Yeah, that would have been all over Instagram. The algorithm would have caught that real fast.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember I wrote this letter to my brother then. I was like telling him we were super into that movie, An American Tail, that cartoon.
Fievel?
Yeah, Fievel. And you know
the worst scene of that movie, by the way.
Okay, tell me.
The most emotional, mostly heart-wrenching scene as a kid was, obviously the separation from one's parents.
Yes.
And being scared and on your own. Obviously, that's like a childhood fear, on some level, not being with your folks. And then the one scene where he's walking with his new friends, or whatever, his buddies in America, and then he doesn't even realize that he's in the same area as his family, and then they're walking above him and he's like below them. I remember seeing that. I was like, no, just say hi to each other, you fucking idiots. That's kind of making me a little emotional right now.
Yeah.
So heart-wrenching.
That leads me to the most emotional thing. I wrote him a letter every single day. That was like my thing. I would like write him letters and just be like, this is what's happening in middle school. And like, I'm getting straight A's because I was crazy.
Crazy smart, apparently.
Yeah, I was just like, I'm getting straight A's. Yeah. And I wrote him, and he like mentioned this because later the Taiwanese news came again to interview us when he came back. So
that's good.
Totally
so they closed the loop.
Yeah, so they closed that loop, but I was
and
like,
everyone in Taiwan don't even realize. Everyone in Taiwan's like, oh, thank God that little girl's okay.
Yeah, because I was just like, I refuse to be interviewed ever again. Because they're like, do you want to like say something now that your brother's back? I was like, no, I'm gonna cry again.
Yeah.
So he came back and like and I didn't even know that he remembered this, but it like touched me so much because I wrote him this letter. I was just like, if you ever feel, I'm gonna get really emotional. If you ever feel scared or if you ever feel scared, just remember that Fievel song that we're under the same moon. And I was like, oh my God. And
man.
He said that letter.
You're really making me feel some type of way right now.
Sorry.
No,
He was just like, that letter got me through so much. And I was just like, I didn't even think anything of it because I was just writing shit as a kid. Yeah. Whoa.
Sandie, you're really... No, this is really beautiful, actually.
Yeah.
You want a tissue?
Yes.
Okay. Let me find
And then I'm ugly crying again.
No, you're not. It's fine. It's fine.
The pausing.
I'll pause.
Are we back?
Yeah, we're back.
Okay, we're back.
Yeah. I didn't want to step away too long from the experience.
Yeah, and then he said that letter got him through so many hard nights because like basically he talked about how every night when you sleep, you have to dig a trench to sleep in it. And he talked about how it felt like digging your own grave. Because you can't sleep above ground because then like missiles or whatever, bullets would hit you. So you sleep kind of like 6 feet under. Not buried, but he said like every night it felt like he was digging his own grave.
Oh my God.
So that letter of me saying like, we're under the same night sky and everything. Just think of me. He was just like, yeah, that letter got me through like so much of just like laying in your own grave, that feeling. And I was like so touched by that. And I was still like 12 or 13 at the time.
Absolutely.
And he was like saying this to these journalists and reporters who were closing the story loop. Yeah. And I don't know where I was going with that, but.
Well, I think we were talking about, how did we start there? No, we started on the idea, oddly enough, of the perception that a bigger Asian, like a heftier Asian person is perceived as more American.
Yeah. And
I think they're like I think in their minds, like chubby Asian gamer.
There we go.
Yeah, and then now we're
have
here in a much more beautiful space.
Yeah, and I think that's why, to tie it all together, that's why I was so drawn to Joseph Pierce and all these Chinese American soldiers, was because I was just like, yeah, we've been fighting these like nonsense wars for forever now, and we're still seen as the other and the outsider. And someone like my brother even joined the Marines, and is perceived as more American because he is bigger.
Yeah.
So yeah, and like I do think he is much more, I don't know if patriotic is the word, but just like for example, we talked once about, oh God, what is his name? That guy who deserted in the war and he got caught by like the Taliban like the next day. It'll come to me. But basically this guy, he deserted. He was caught by the Taliban and he was like tortured for 5 years straight. And then there was an exchange and he's back in America now. And there is this argument of like,
he wasn't the dude from the season 2 of Serial, was he?
It was a season, yeah.
Okay.
That guy. And there's this whole argument of like,
I didn't even finish that season.
I didn't finish this season
First
either.
season's so good. Second season, I wish I was more interested.
Yeah, I wasn't that into it. But I remember asking my brother this, and I was just like, how do you feel about, like, should he go to prison for life, or what should happen to him? Because I remember, because Trump made this whole rhetoric of like, oh, he should be shot on sight because he deserted. And like, well, don't do that. But I was just thinking, like, you know, should he even deserve to go to prison after being tortured and all this stuff for 5 years straight? Does he even deserve that anymore?
Right. Or was that quote unquote a price?
Yeah.
He's already paid a price.
Yeah, exactly. And my brother was just like, yeah, of course he needs to go to prison. Like, you don't abandon your brothers, so to speak. And I would never.
The worst crime.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just like, and I can't even imagine. I can't imagine going to war. And I can't imagine what my brother went through, because I think about it. He was only like 19 when he was in Iraq, and that's intense. And I was in college.
Is your brother still in the military?
No, he's not in the military. He left as a staff sergeant. But he still like hangs out with his military friends. I recently started reading a book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's about trauma and PTSD. And, you know, I think that's why I'm so emotional, is because I've been thinking a lot about like what PTSD and trauma does to a person. Because in this book, basically this psychologist, he talks about how even when you're done with war as a veteran, like the only time you ever feel alive is when you're in like a war-like simulation. And he plays a lot of Call of Duty with his friends.
Okay.
And I just like sometimes think about that. I was just like, is it because this is the only time you feel alive? Or do you like, because your body still remembers what that trauma feels like, that adrenaline of like life or death. So I think I've just been thinking a lot about that, and like, if, you know, what would it take to heal from that sort of PTSD? Because yeah, I think he definitely suffers from it. Right. I mean, anyone would, because
would he contextualize it as suffering, or for him is it more of there's a comfort?
Yeah, I don't know.
Comfort the wrong word? Yeah,
I don't know, and I think that's something that I would want to ask him one day, because when I read that about how like there's this camaraderie with people who are veterans, and like when they talk about violence and like war, that is really exciting to them, actually, even though it hurt them so much. Because where was I going? Oh, because there is this therapy called EMDR, and it basically unfreezes because basically when you have PTSD or you have trauma, your body still moves through life as if you're still in that state of trauma. So EMDR basically unfreezes your brain to that trauma so that you can move on.
And what does that treatment entail? EMDR? It's
something to do with eye movement. I think it's like it's almost like being hypnotized, but not really. But basically they do something with your eyes, so your eyes are always moving back and forth as you're recounting the trauma, and it can get really intense. So I don't know, but
I'm doing moving my eyes back and forth, like trying to understand like how that would even physically.
Yeah, but I think with this book, The Body Keeps the Score, and like this new wave of like, because I think some celebrities now are talking about EMDR, so it's just like it's becoming on the forefront of my brain of like, what is this? What is?
And it helps people move past trauma.
Yeah, trauma. Wow. And I think, I haven't really thought about my brother being traumatized until recently, until reading that book. Yeah. And now it's Veterans Day, and then I talked about this.
Yeah. We just opened all of it up.
Yeah, it's like a therapy session.
Yeah, totally. Well, isn't podcasting like therapy essentially?
It is. It is like because you're so present with another person, and like we're not very present in our daily lives.
Yeah, that's true. And you're very, very conscious of the words that you're saying, the words that they're saying, and you're trying to engage with a flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. How's acting? How's your acting going?
I'm getting my headshots in December. Booked a headshot photographer. She's great. Hopefully. Yeah, I think she's great. And then I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna start auditioning after I get my headshots. Yeah.
Scary.
It is scary.
But fun scary.
Yeah, I think it's fun scary. I think I'm just like, I'm always going to be a writer and a storyteller, and I think I don't want to put my entire identity on just acting because, at the end of the day, I'm always going to be creating.
Yes.
And if acting doesn't, quote unquote, work out, it'll still be there. It's not like something you have to achieve after you're a certain age. And I think like things like Instagram and social media make it seem like you have to be like 18 forever. And I think Hollywood has that perception too.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's troubling the amount of hyperbaric chamber like youth that people expect upon their talent.
Yeah, and it's okay to age. I think it's exciting for me.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm stoked to be in my late 30s.
Yeah, I think it's exciting because then you're just like, I don't know, everyone is like in a rush to get something, and I don't feel that rush anymore. I think in my earlier 20s I did. And now I'm just like, if it happens, it'll happen. Like, I'm going to keep working towards it. But if it doesn't happen, like, I'm not going to die. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know where all that pressure. I think it comes from social media, but I don't know.
I'm pretty sure. Well, social media probably just enhanced the pressure. Social media just gave everyone an app to look at.
Yeah.
That basically, like, puts it all in a neat little box. Otherwise, it was always just in the ether, I think.
Yeah, and I think I took a social media hiatus, and that was really helpful to be like, I didn't miss anything.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was really addicted to Instagram at one point, being like, oh my God, like, what did I miss? Like, what are people doing? All this FOMO. And now I'm like, I don't really care. And
well, that's good. That's good to not care.
Yeah.
It's a healthy thing.
It is.
I feel.
Yeah. And like when people like actually stop everything just to put things on their story, I'm just like, that's almost a little sad. Just be in the moment. Just
be in the moment. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's why podcasting does feel like therapy, because no one is ever in the moment anymore.
I agree. I remember when I first started this, I'd be curious to know what you think. When I first started this, it was such a refreshing mindset to place myself in, because you knew that you had dedicated at least an hour plus to finding and discovering new things about someone that you were already kind of familiar with. Yeah. And you just wanted to know more. Yeah. From people that, that I barely knew to people that were like I'd known for years and years. Yeah. Yeah. It was a new experience.
Yeah, because we've known each other for years, but in like a partying context.
Yeah, exactly.
I've actually cried. I don't cry in front of a lot of people unless it's like very fair. Yeah, I haven't cried in front of like a lot of my closest friends. And it's just like
yeah. Well, that was a beautiful thing that we just shared, actually.
Yeah, I think so. It brought us closer together.
Totally. Yeah. In the moment, super present.
Yeah.
Talking about Fievel.
I need to like rewatch that and cry again.
Could we? Oh man. Could we just never? Or, I mean, I don't mean like that. I mean, the idea of Fievel and the idea of, I was thinking about your podcast. Did I tell you the story about how I was at SVA and then I was also emotionally raw? Yes. And then I was watching the end of Ninja Turtles, the movie, where they're just cheering victoriously on a rooftop after having just killed the Shredder. Yeah. And then I'm in my dorm just bawling for some reason. And then thinking like, what was that just happened to me right now? But because, art school just makes you a raw nerve.
Art school makes you go like, all of these emotions just like purge out of you.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like inside out constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. Recently I watched The Haunting of Hill House. Okay. I like sobbed through that as well. Really? Are you ever going to watch it?
I'm not really a horror type person. I
hate horror.
I do want to see the new Halloween, but I haven't
I mean, I hate
engaged.
horror. It was I screamed a lot through it. It was really fucking scary. But there was just this one moment where, because it's about, I think the true horror is that it's about grief and like what grieving does to a family and a person. And that's what the haunting really is. I mean, there are ghosts and shit that pop out of nowhere.
Sure.
But that was the true horror. And I just like cried throughout the entire thing.
Oh, because of the subtext.
Yeah, it was. But there was this one moment where, spoiler alert, the mom dies, but that was the very first episode. You find that out in the very first episode.
Okay.
That's like what they're grieving. But there's a flashback of like all the kids running up the stairs in this big mansion trying to claim their rooms. And then she's like looking up and she says, "You guys go on without me." And the dad turns back and says, "How could we?" And that was just like, that's so heart-wrenching.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that was like the true horror of like they couldn't move on without her.
Damn.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I have to watch it now. Now I'm scared to watch it because it's gonna just turn me to a raw nerve.
It's really scary, but it's really beautiful storytelling and great like cinematography and everything. If you're into that,
I am into that.
Yeah,
I am into those things.
Well, how is work going with you? Am I allowed to ask?
Oh yeah, you're definitely allowed to ask. Oh, everything's great. I mean, I'm taking a week off, which is nice.
Oh yeah.
So, but I am going to London this week to talk at the Global Innovation Forum conference to talk about inclusion within design, and I'm giving a talk called "The Toxic Grid." How diversity, I'm probably getting my own subtitle wrong, but the toxic grid, how diversity in design is important for our culture in the future. And
interesting.
Yeah, and I gave a similar talk last year at Creative Summit here in New York. And this talk I'm kind of tweaking it a bit, where I'm taking the idea of the grid, which is a design concept, or typically a design concept, but also like, kind of a digital thought too, where the grid, it symbolizes balance, structure, and to a lot of people, Eurocentric vision of design, or it is a Eurocentric vision of design.
Yeah.
Because it feels very Swiss,
Yes.
to throw some design stuff in there.
Or
and
Danish.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, the idea of multiculturalism and and aesthetics that aren't driven by the typical vision of balance and structure, they're very interesting to me.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to use the talk, or trying to use that platform to say, like, here's what you typically think the grid is, and then I'm gonna show, like, here's what you think the grid is. So I'm just trying to form my thoughts, because I have the keynote presentation, but I haven't talked through it yet. Here's what you think the grid is. Here's what the grid could be. Then I break in the talk to give a personal story about. I talk about the Tower of Babel, and the Tower of Babel, this Bible story about building structures and how we build structures, like, they are destroyed by other powers, right? So man likes structure, which is kind of the grid. And then I go into another personal story about how when I was young, as an Asian person growing up, the only I'd never seen an empowered Asian person on screen in some way until I'd seen Rufio and Hook. Yeah. And just so happened that Rufio is Filipino, Dante Bosco. So I use that to say, like, the vision of myself that I had was a Eurocentric vision until I'd seen an empowered version of what I could be. Yeah. I'm not phrasing it right, but like someone that's empowered, that's like me on screen. Yeah. And then I take that into a space of, like the grid could be a place for inclusion. If you allow the grid to be a tool to let it to stretch and skew, and you can change the content in here. Yeah. It's a different type of structure.
Yeah, that's really cool. Like, I've been hearing a lot about like representation in design and like ethics in design, and I never really understood what that meant. So it's like really cool to hear your perspective of that, because the only other thing I've read about it was like someone shared this article about like how the ethics of they made the example of like those soap dispensers, and in my mind I thought they
Yeah, put your hand under there.
Yeah, and that happens. But apparently if a black hand goes under a soap dispenser, sometimes it doesn't dispense.
Oh.
And like that's also like something to think about as a designer, which
Yeah.
I would never think about because I'm just like, I thought there was like some motion, not color sense, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like really cool that you're in that space.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally. It's a new frontier, I think, and I just recently judged the Society of Illustrators, where and I've never judged that particular award, but I have judged other awards. This year, I judged for Society of Illustrators, Art Directors Club, and also Ad Color Awards. And Ad Color Awards are specifically about multiculturalism in the creative lens. So when I judged the Art Directors Club, which I judged before,
Yeah.
like when I judged the first time, no one really talked about inclusion.
Yeah.
And this was back in, it was fairly recent, 2012, maybe 2012, 2013.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm probably, blanking on the year. And then this year, there was way more talk about inclusion design. Also,
Yeah.
we were in the Dominican Republic and judging a lot of posters from Asia, interestingly enough. So there was an open conversation about how do we judge, and my sensibilities are typically Western.
Yeah.
So how do we judge Asian design based on their own parameters of success?
Yeah.
You
yeah.
know? So, in Asia, this might be a very successful piece of communication, but I just want to make sure that I'm not missing a beat. And
Yeah,
the group that we were with wanted to make sure we weren't missing a beat.
Yeah.
We were fairly multicultural within our group. And then I judge Ad Color, and that's all about inclusion, right?
Yeah.
Then at the Illustrators thing a couple weeks ago, we were heavily in that inclusion conversation, and I just can't imagine those conversations happening even up to like 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
You know?
Because I feel like it was 3 or 4 years ago where Scandinavian design became super popular, at least in mainstream media.
Oh, sure.
Where like a lot of things are just like, oh, like Scandinavian interior design is where it's at, and minimalism and things like that. And I feel like now there's a shift to Japanese design. Correct me if I'm wrong. I have no idea.
Oh well, no,
Yeah.
I'm a student of
Yeah.
of whatever I'm being receptive to.
Well, now there's like this whole thing about like imperfectionism
Yes.
and how that wabi-sabi is now very big in the design world. I don't know if that's true or not.
What is wabi-sabi?
It's like this idea of beauty and imperfection. It's a Japanese idea. And like how, like
Like a bonsai tree?
not a bonsai
And
tree.
how a bonsai tree can get all funky?
Like, how sometimes they have like gold lining in cracked ceramics. Like if a ceramic piece became cracked, they would like put gold in it to
Sure.
like sort of highlight the imperfection.
Oh, okay. Yes.
And something that's been like used a lot, like a kettle that's been used a lot, there's like rust or something.
Yeah.
There's like beauty in like something being used,
Yes,
and like
yes.
that imperfection, and how not everything is just like straight and narrow and
Yeah.
everything. I mean,
Because
that's just
I
what
think it
I've heard.
indicates, I think it's warmer.
Yeah.
Warmer by nature, the idea of imperfection, but also it's actually a more beautiful thought to see that something is being receptive to humans.
Yeah.
I think something about minimalism that is a bit of a put off for me is the idea that it's pristine and that it's almost anti-human.
Yeah. It's like, it just
Cold.
makes you feel cold. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you feel
Yeah.
cold, and I push against a lot of that sentiment. I'm not about perfection necessarily, and I know in my day-to-day work, at the office, I am always trying to push into an expressive space, and even my own personal work, I push things into an expressive space. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at, and it's a new frontier. It's a new frontier, and there are only a few voices I think that are pushing that world.
Yeah. How do you make yourself be more representative? Because you were saying you have a more Western lens when it comes to illustration and design. So how do you push yourself to be exposed to different cultures of design? Is it like museums or any exhibitions, or what what does one do if they were like a student of design?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's about actively seeking things out and always being receptive, and not necessarily like looking for trend, but having the understanding that things always originate from somewhere, and knowing that that if something isn't even it doesn't relate to your lens at the time, that there's probably an origin of there's probably a language being spoke that you may not be privy to yet. Like I recently joined the AIGA, and it's one of those an organization driven towards design, and design the design discourse, right? It's kind of like it's like the Art Directors Club or the One Club, Society of Illustrators, like all those things. It's just that. So at AIGA, there's this. I'm on the advocacy and inclusion committee for their board of directors, and we're for me, seeing like being in that conversation is very fascinating to me, because seeing events that are being put on, like there's a very recent event that they put on about nameplates. Like, you go to, you're in the Bronx, you're in Brooklyn or whatever, you just see a gold nameplate, someone's name. And a lot of people think of that as like that's disposable design, and it's probably like, for lack of a better term, low class, right? But I'm looking at that, and I think the event of this event was driven towards, and this happened before my time, but I was very fascinated by it. It was it doesn't give you like the dumbed down version of the nameplate of like what that means. It's more of like these are all dope nameplates. It gives you insight into the artistry of them. And it doesn't start you at step 1. It actually starts you at like step 3 or 4 within the process. So it's just it's like an elevated showcase of what the best version of this is. So that's kind of a personal philosophy of me, of like how it will show me what the best version of that thing is. Let's talk about it. And like the detective part of me will want to deconstruct and kind of understand the nature of it. There's this project I've been trying to get off the ground with a good friend of mine, Robin Landa, where we're trying to do a book on typography.
Cool.
About diverse typography or multiculturalism within typography. Because, going back to the whole Swiss thing, a lot of people, everyone knows what Helvetica is.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Everyone
Everyone knows that it's a movie, right?
Yes.
It's a great typeface, very on brand for MTV. And there's, to take it to another aesthetic spectrum, there's graffiti, right? And like to take it to another aesthetic spectrum, there's like brush style Japanese characters, right?
Yeah.
Like, and anything else in between. So like, what do all those things have in common, and what are all those things? What's the origin of thought there, and how does one discern what good and bad and all that stuff is? We don't know what the book is necessarily. It's trying to be an academic thing. So that's another challenge. So that takes a lot of peer review and even like pitching the idea. But
that's really cool. I can't wait. Well, if it is a book, I will definitely buy it. For coffee table.
It might be something like maybe a 2020 thing. Who knows?
Yeah, or it could be another documentary.
Yeah, exactly.
Why does Helvetica deserve its own documentary?
I think that's a prolific prolific typeface that I think is deserving of a documentary just because of everything that it's appeared in. As something as simple as airport signage, changes people's lives. People don't realize what clarity from 100 feet away and an inch away. That gives it a lot of breadth and a lot of legs.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people think about design in that way. Just like how I was telling you, I didn't think about ethics in design either. So there's a lot that goes into design. It's really cool.
Yeah, totally. Well, the design industry is a fascinating place. It's a space that I exist in for sure for some time now. But even from going back to the whole education thing, it's not that easy to break into the design industry in New York. You know, there's a small number of schools that are considered like in the upper echelon, and then to enter the creative community after coming out of one of those quote unquote favored schools, that's its own thing. Yeah. But then, you know, there are a lot of state schools like community colleges that offer programs within design that may not necessarily have all the resources of one of the preferred schools, but then those also serve communities that are underserved. Yeah. Yeah. You know, because of financial reasons, because of geographic reasons. You know, maybe a kid in Newark, New Jersey, can only go to a certain school. You know, but maybe he or she has talent, and you know, what chance do they have to break into the community? So you know, that's another thing about AIGA and ethics. Yeah, about serving underserved communities.
Yeah, I really like that perspective too, because I think a lot of people put so much weight into these name brand schools, and I think I'm like Harvard. And I'm coming from this idea of like, well, do you really want to go into so much debt now just to go into, I mean, if you can afford it, yeah, good for you. But like you're saying, what about the kid from Newark or just an average person, like to be in that so much debt, and debt is like such a huge topic now, especially student debt, to, you know, learn design or to learn, I don't know, a liberal arts degree. And it's just like, sometimes I don't think that debt is worth it. And I think there shouldn't be shame attached to community colleges or to not name brand schools, which there is. Agree. And I think that is very classist and elitist. Yeah. Yeah.
Classist and elitist. Yep. That should be a t-shirt. Yes. Classist and elitist. Yeah. But then like there'll be like a red strike through it. Yeah. Maybe. Is that a bad t-shirt idea?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I've never had any t-shirt ideas. I'm just like, oh yeah, I don't know. Sounds good. I never wear graphic tees.
Oh yeah, I've never seen you in a graphic tee.
Yeah, I'm always wearing like black something.
Gotcha. You have a graphic pin though.
Oh yeah. This is Garrett's pin.
Oh, it's dope.
Yeah. I almost forgot I was wearing it because this is just like clasp this together. But yeah, it's an Oakland pin. It's in the shape of a cross. Let me see if I can get this, his idea of it correctly. But basically his idea was that Oakland is now becoming this coveted city because of gentrification, even though Oakland historically has been not so great, but because of like tech moving into the Bay Area, it's like gentrifying Oakland, and now all these white hipsters basically are viewing Oakland as like this beautiful, amazing city. Because he has another pin that's an upside down cross of San Francisco, to show that, San Francisco is like this condemned city because of tech gentrification. I think a lot of his art has to do with gentrification and speaking out against gentrification and capitalism and consumerism and things like that. Yeah. Because these are things I don't think we think about that often, because I just live in Bed-Stuy, and you know, historically, there's also implications there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's a complicated conversation.
It is.
Yeah, we're going to crack all the issues today.
There's so many issues, but yeah, it's a great pin.
It is a great pin. Yeah. So what are you doing next? I know you're doing a podcast.
Yes.
A women's podcast.
Yes. I'm going to Work It.
Got it.
Festival.
Okay. Thank you for saving me. I was just like, how do I explain the thing that you...
Yeah, I'm going on Tuesday and Wednesday because this episode's going to come out. So yes, I'm going to go to Work It. It's a 2-day podcast festival conference for women and non-binary people. Is that how they identify? Sorry. But yeah, I got this scholarship for it a year ago because I was like, I'm not going to pay money for this. I don't have money to go to this conference because I was still in school. Right. And I And
you applied for a scholarship to the conference?
Yeah, it was like for women of color who are podcasters. They
That's
can
very
apply
cool.
to this scholarship, and I was like,
And had
I'm
you
a
launched the
student.
podcast at that point?
No, I hadn't. I just had the idea, and I was just like, this is my idea. So when I got it, I was like, okay, I really have to do this podcast. And
That's a great
Yeah.
motivation to get off your
Yeah.
ass.
Yeah, so it's like really cool because they like connect you with producers. I think it's sponsored by WNYC. And they connect you with like all these people. There's like a lot of talks about podcasting and like how to get into the industry. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. So I'm doing that this week.
That's very cool.
I'm also working on a pilot right now. It's untitled. I don't really love the working title right now. The working title is Imposters, but it's a mockumentary style. I don't know if it's going to be a web series, but we just want to shoot the pilot, and that is slated for spring of next year to start shooting. I'm working on like budgeting and all this like producer stuff, like
Right.
getting a team together, figuring out location, figuring out crew and things like that. And yeah, hopefully shooting a pilot and pitching it to networks. I have
That's
to
awesome.
like work on my pitch skills and pitch deck. And
Oh,
everything.
sure. Ooh, that
Next
pitch
year.
deck.
Next year.
Yeah,
pitch
that
deck.
pitch deck's going to be tough.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm really excited about it because obviously I'm really into representative casts. So it is going to be a very representative cast. It is going to be a comedy. Yeah, that's basically it for me.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And where can my listeners find you?
Oh, you can find me on Instagram. I am at Sandie Pants, SANDIE Pants with 2 S's at the end. And you can also find my podcasts at Now in Color Podcasts, also on Instagram. And we're everywhere, iTunes, Spotify, etc.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm also on Twitter, but you don't want to follow me on Twitter. I don't do anything there.
I don't really do anything on Twitter anymore either.
Yeah. What about you for my listeners?
So this week I'm doing that Global Innovation Forum.
Mm-hmm.
So that's happening. That's a thing. I don't know if they're recording that talk. Hopefully they are, but if not, you can listen to this podcast, First Generation Burden. We also have a website with all the episodes and archive, firstgenburden.com, and it has all the links there. So it's just a nice little handy dandy. Also, we are on iTunes and First Generation Burden, full name, on iTunes. And you can find me, Rich Tu, on Instagram at Rich, RICH_TU. And I'm on Twitter as well, but I rarely use it. Otherwise, if you just want to check out some cool art, design, all that, you can go to my website at richtu.com.
Cool.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
otherwise, I'm just, living life. I'm out here.
Yeah, same. Just doing my thing. Working on my pilot, working on my podcast,
There you go.
trying not to burn out.
Same.
Yeah.
Same. Well, first of all, lastly, Sandie, thank you so much for coming and, doing this podcast. It was really fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was like a really, really fun collaboration. We should do it again in a few months. Have another history podcast
Exactly.
/ First Generation Burden podcast.
Yes. Perfect.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.